Good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Churchhouse, and welcome to the HR Congress podcast for today. I've got a very special guest, Mr. Charles-Henri Besseyre de Horts, who is an emeritus professor at HEC Paris. Charles-Henri is an experienced professor and researcher with a demonstrated history of working in the higher education industry. He is a skilled human resources, talent management, strategic planning, and business development professor. He has a French doctorate and a PhD focused in management from the University of California, Los Angeles, the Anderson School of Management. He also speaks frequently at various conferences and is a frequent fixture in the French human resources community. And Charles-Henri will be presenting a session at the HR Congress Nice this November in the high performance HR track, which we'll hear a little bit more about later. So thank you again, Charles-Henri, for joining me. Nice early morning start.
Thanks, Ben. I should add that I am also the president, the chairman of the Francophone Association of HR academics, professors and researchers. So we have about 1,000 members, including people from Quebec, Africa, North Africa, Belgium, Switzerland.
So a very important role, obviously, and that's something I want to touch on a little bit more about the Francophone world and especially France and the HR community later on. I wanted to start with a question because I know we met very briefly at the Brussels event last year, which you were coming specifically to see Mr. Vineet Nayar, who was one of our speakers. And I know that you have quite a close relationship with him. And I wanted to just talk to you a little bit more about that to begin with, to bridge from last year into this year. What is it that you find interesting and informative and intriguing about Mr. Nayar and especially his tenure at the head of HCL Technologies?
I discovered the name of Vineet Nayar when I had the chance to find his book late June 2010. It was just published by Harvard Business Press, and it has been really a bestseller then. So I had a chance to meet in person Vineet Nayar in May 2011, so nearly 1 year later in Paris, when the book was published, in French. And by the way, France is the second best-selling place in the world for his book. So that's interesting. Then I really met Vineet, and I found a leader who is an exceptional leader. When we say a leader has a vision, he has a vision. When we say leader walks the talk, should walk the talk, he is walking the talk. And to be honest, he is inspiring. What has been basically a shock when I read the book was the fact that it was an explanation how you invert the pyramid. Many people have been talking for 30 years about inversion of the pyramid. He did it, Mm-hmm. And the concept of, for instance, employees first, customers second is very important, obviously, because it's the title of the book, but it's often misunderstood. But he did something that has been a success, a long-term success, and still today, even if he's no longer the leader of the company HCL Technologies, the spirit of Vineet is continuing. You see.
So what particular lessons can HR and business leaders take from the HCL case study in particular? Now, obviously, HCL is a very, very large company. What Vineet did, inverting the pyramid, is not an easy thing. What lessons can be learned from that case?
Yeah. When Vineet took the role of CEO of HCL, it was in 2005. It was about 25,000 employees. When he left, it was around 90,000 employees, and today it's about 140,000 employees. You see, the growth has continued. So as far as the lessons for HR and business leaders could take from the example of HCL, I would say that understanding clearly the concept of employees first, customers second. That means a number of people, would think that it's just, a mistake to some extent. And I would say that, in fact, the idea of employees first, customers second was to say that the client is so important that you have to better serve the people serving the clients. He calls these people the people in the value zone. So in terms of big lessons is all the organization and including the CEO, including the HR function, including all managers, I would say, are serving the employees, serving the clients. So that's the whole idea of the employees first, customers second. And what is interesting is the concept has a big change over time in the past, let's say 5-6 years. where the idea is now to talk more about ideapreneurship. That means all employees may have excellent ideas to develop business with the clients. You see, so again, it's always the same idea that you push the people to, and in fact, you help the people to better serve the clients and discover new business. By the way, you see, for HR, I would say that basically the idea of HCL is to put HR in a real strategic role. In fact, to try to develop EFCS, which is employees first, customer second approach. You have to work on the cultures and values. You have to work on recruitment. What kind of people you want to recruit, how you develop people, what kind of performance system you put in place, the rewards, so everything should be organized in order to develop this employees first concept, and again, at the end of the day, to better serve the clients, the customers, you see.
So the age of digital transformations is well upon most organizations now. Leaders now have to be very competent in a number of tasks and be a change agent for a process that is essentially now ongoing. How can HR step into this role in order to ensure that organizations are best optimized to benefit not only corporate performance, but humans as well?
The issue of change, especially in the age of digital transformation, is a critical issue. For HR, it's not easy because the role of change agent for HR in many countries was not, natural. Is not natural. The HR function is more in a compliance controlling role. You see, it's kind of function that is try to do the organization more stable than agile. You see, that's and because of many reasons. One of them, obviously, is labor laws. So beyond the traditional competencies, HR obviously has a key responsibility in the change process. 1988, I wrote the first book on strategic HR, in French language, you see. And to be honest, 31 years later, I would say that we still have to have an HR function that is much more involved in the business, understanding the business. Even the term business partner, as you see it often, is not a perfect, a term, because very often when we talk about business partner, we see people just saying yes to the business. And I would say a very important strategic role, obviously, in the change process for HR is to propose, to be much more a proactive role, you see. And that's why I would say that HR has to have, a foot at the table, a real place at the table, and being much more in influential role. That means, obviously, to have the competencies, the basic HR competencies, to be strong in basic HR competencies, but more than HR competencies, to be able to really influence the business, you see. And this is something that is critical. For instance, everybody says digital obviously has a strong impact on today in organizational transformation. I mean, it's very strange that HR has been late, in the discovery of the importance of people in digital. Because for me, HR hasn't learned, something that a school of management called social technical system during the 50s and the 60s. This school of management, this school of thought, say that when you change a technology, you have also to think of the social system. That's why it's called social technical systems, you see. And HR has a critical role in changing the social systems, you see. So again, now I see more and more HR deeply involved in digital transformation and even leading the transformation, digital transformation. That is obviously the obvious role HR should have, you see. And again, because transformation and change is always an issue of people.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme that I've heard from most of the people I've talked to.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, for me, it's obvious.
Yeah, no, it is obvious, but it's something that I do feel has been a little forgotten or glossed over, perhaps. in the rush to.
Yeah, but as I say, there was a school of thought, social technical system already in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s. The researchers say when you have a technology called change, you have to think of the social change. You see, they call it joint optimization, joint optimization of both systems, the technical system and social system. We all have done technical change, many technical change since the past 50, 60 years, but we have often forgotten the social part. And now we discover that digital is all about human, but for me it was obvious since the beginning. Just look at the impact of mobile technologies. I had a research chair at HEC between 2002 and 2008 on the mobile nomad technologies. And for me, the only important issue was the mobile nomad technologies were changing the relationship between management and employees, between people together, because they didn't have any they could work anytime, anywhere. It was long before what we call the digital transformation, you see, nearly 20 years ago.
You can only imagine now what, so for example, enterprise social media and all of these technologies are doing for the work-life relationship between management. I mean, I have enterprise social media on my mobile. I'm sitting here doing a podcast, and my manager could be messaging me all kinds of things I should be doing.
I know, that's why I would say obviously we talk about digital, but I think the technology, all the big changes in the technology should be thought in the context of the social system, and the HR has a key role.
I wanted to move on to a question which is a tricky one for me, because I'm not really generalizing about generational differences. I don't usually these categorizations of millennial or Gen Y or Gen X or whatever. But there is, in some sense, an undoubtable shift in the way that a lot of youth approach technology and work as well. So what can more senior HR professionals learn from their younger colleagues about some of these changes, and perhaps vice versa? What can some of the younger colleagues learn from more senior HR folk?
Yeah, as just said, it's very important to understand the interaction between technology and people and organization, as the social technical systems called say. Senior HR professionals can learn from their younger colleagues, obviously, who have known technology in their early years, for the Gen Y. And if you hire what we call the Gen Z people that are born after 1995, they had internet in their, since their birth, So they can learn, so that I'd say the senior HR people can learn a lot about how to master digital tools, especially the social networks, the impact of social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and maybe LinkedIn. However, LinkedIn is much more professional, network. They can also learn something that is very important for organization. They can learn how to develop and manage individual and collective reputation, you see. And because this is obviously with the internet, you know a lot of things about yourself, about the organization, and they have, for instance, to manage what is said on a glass door, about the reputation of the company, the reputation of management. And last but not the least, I think the younger generation are also aware of security issues, cyber security issues. So I would say from the young colleagues may teach senior HR people more about the security issue. Conversely, the senior HR leaders can teach younger HR professionals about more the collective dimension of HR, because with the digital we have basically a one-to-one, mostly a one-to-one relation. So it's important to remind that HR is both individual and collective, and I would say that what senior HR can teach, younger people, younger professional, is importance of the collective dimension, you see. And also, especially in Europe, continental Europe, the remaining importance of labor relations, you see, and which is important. And obviously, the last but not the least, the issue of what I call good human relations. I mean, at the end of the day, you can have a lot of digital connection, which is good, digital relations, but at the end of the day, it's the human relations. And I think the more senior people have been used to be more relational to some extent, you see. So again, keeping the human side of digital would be I think something the young professionals can learn more from the senior HR people.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about was a little more to do specifically with the landscape of French HR, because I'm not an expert, obviously, in that area. I've read online in a couple of places that HR organizations in France tend to be a little more traditional, so to speak, than in other parts of Europe when it comes to the business transformation or perhaps what's going on at the moment within HR. But I wanted to ask you, seeing as I think you'd probably be one of the best people to ask, what does this actually mean?
We have to be a bit careful with this idea, or this, I would call it even a cliche, French world, something, we make some hypotheses about what is HR in France. I would say, obviously, compare maybe to Northern Europe, tradition were more traditional. But you have also to be careful, because if you look at the largest French firms, I'm talking about the CAC 40, which is CAC 40, which is the group of 40 very large firms, and even SBF 120, which is the 120 firm. You look at the profile of HR leaders, and I know at least half of them, at least a good connection. I can tell you that the profiles of these HR leaders are no longer very traditional. They are very business oriented, more and more transformation leaders, you see. And also the profiles of these HR people have moved from the traditional profile of psych and law, to much more business orientation, business schools, graduates. And also you have a number of HR leaders who have been in business roles before, a growing number. So we have to be careful when we talk about, what means traditional. However, we are in a Latin culture, and Latin cultures have a tendency to be more less easy, I would say, with the change. You see, much more kind of hierarchical, and so that's why I would say, there is maybe some traditional aspect in French HR, but looking at especially the bigger firms, I would say that we are really facing, some very interesting. We are looking at interesting, HR practices, and we don't have anything to envy, to be jealous of when we compare with other countries in especially in Europe. So you see, but again, we have still the pressure of culture. We have still the pressure of labor laws, and very strict labor laws. As you know, we were the only country, I guess, in Europe to have passed a real 35 hours a week law 20 years ago. So this is a kind of a situation. So obviously, HR has to comply with the laws, and maybe HR is seen as a much more traditional because of this pressure of labor laws. You see. I would say there is an issue of size. Clearly, the medium and small size firms are more traditional HR to some extent, because they are also under, as I say, under the pressure of labor laws, and they have to deal. The bigger organization obviously have been able to develop, HR functions that are more, I would say, business oriented, more strategic to some extent, and so on. So that's why. It's difficult to say what means to be a traditional, but I see a change, especially with the young HR professionals, because there is obviously a difference between the senior people who have been in the function for 25, 30, 35 years, and the young professional that coming from more business education.
So you've been researching, teaching, consulting, practicing, and a lot of things in HR for a number of years now. With
more than 30 years.
Yeah, well, it's a lot. With your experience regarding the changes in the profession, where do you see HR heading? Now, obviously, it's a huge question and it doesn't need to be a huge answer, but where do you see things going?
You have to be honest and to be humble when you ask this question and you try to answer this question. Sorry, because seeing what will be HR in 10 to 15 years is really a big challenge. Obviously, HR professionals will be more and more considered as managing the key asset, of the organization, likely to create the unique competitive advantage. People, in a world where technology will take all basic and repetitive tasks, and clearly we will have a change of many jobs, not so much disappearing the job. Many people think 50% of the jobs will disappear. I don't think it will be the case, but transformation of the job, that the content will be important. The difference between organizations, will be based on relations, and people create and maintain relations with all stakeholders, primarily with clients, through the quality of service. So in other words, what I see for HR is the HR is the function that will be able to create this unique competitive advantage, Obviously, HR will be accountable to build a competent, engaged, and flexible workforce, more and more responsible to deliver the best customized HR services to various clients, and I put clients between quotes, Obviously, diverse managers and employees. When I say diverse, I use the word diverse because of diversity and men and women, age difference, and so on, And those people who don't want to work also for the organization, but they are, employed, So those people called freelancers. We will have more and more freelancers in the workforce there, but there won't be obviously formal employees, And what I see also as a future of HR is the issue of culture and values. I think it will be more and more important to work on what I call the why of the organization, namely what we call the purpose, or the sense, And HR has a key role in nurturing, developing this issue of culture and values, And when you see the expectations of younger generations, they look for sense, they look for purpose, and clearly HR has a key role to nurture, develop, and help managers, because at the end of the day, people who are the key HR managers are the managers.
So you'll be presenting a session in the High Performance HR track at the HR Congress this year. What can attendees expect from that session?
I've been researching and looking at the HR profession for more than 30 years, giving me the opportunity to have a long-term view of the HR trends. So I will explain what are the trends of the evolution of the roles of HR function from the administrative legal role, that happened in HR up to the 70s, let's say, to the strategic incubator role, and I will explain the role of an incubator, while we had also during the 80s and 90s what I call the motivational managerial role. So I will explain a bit the trends, the long-term trends of HR. Then I will insist on the fact that the HR profession today has still some traces of these different roles. So it's we still have some administrative, we still have some legal, we still have a number, but HR has become much more complex. I will then explain that HR today is obviously as a new turning point. We had a number of turning points in the history of HR, with a combined impact of already famous major trends. Obviously, the digital, with the impact of obviously of the artificial intelligence on jobs and competences, the issue of diversity of people, as I say, age, gender, nationality, status, are you in the organization or out, for instance, with higher expectation for equity and transparency, Then corporate social responsibility with the growing importance for the organization to try to preserve the planet, so that the expectations of employees, obviously, and customers, you see. And last but not least, still remain the globalization issue, you see. So I will continue on the idea that HR needs to reinvent itself, putting even more emphasis on the capacity to develop organizational agility. Obviously, the quality of service for HR will be a critical issue. The customization of HR services with the help of digital tools, and the capacity of demonstrating higher value creation for the main stakeholders. So that means HR has to prove the results of what HR is doing, you see. And last but not the least, the preservation of what I call the organizational glue. Again, culture and values will be very, very critical. My conclusion will insist on the fact that HR has to preserve and develop what makes this function unique, the H of HR, that means human and people relations. HR is the most relational and transversal function.